your floor, please.
Thank you very much, Liao, and it's good to be with former colleagues and great experts on the WTO and on China's participation in it. Arguably, I'd say the action by the WTO to bring China into the system was the most important action it took in its 26-year history. You could also argue that the accession of China to the WTO was one of the most important steps that China took in its economic interrelations with the rest of the world. While all the 164 members of the WTO benefit substantially and have benefited substantially from the WTO, I'd say that China was second to none in terms of the benefits it achieved. As been said by my colleagues on the panel, hundreds of millions of Chinese came out of poverty. The lives of China's people were greatly enhanced. But this is not the end of history. It's an unfinished story. The expectation of China's trading partners in 2001 was that China would continue its integration with other economies in the global economy. The purpose of the WTO is a shared commitment to ever greater openness of trade on fair terms, free of distortions. It's about convergence based on this ideal. By joining the WTO, China pledged that commercial enterprises, whether or not state-owned, must act solely on the basis of commercial considerations, buying and selling decisions free from government interference or influence, and that market-oriented behavior is expected of all, not just China, all WTO members. The WTO rules should make this basic tenet, I think, explicit, should be adopted. China has said that in any new trade agreement will take on responsibilities in line with its capacity. That's extraordinarily important, a praiseworthy commitment. Acting in accordance with it will increase trust in the trading system. The G20 leaders have repeatedly called for WTO reform. As the world's second largest economy, largest exporter of goods, China has the resources, including expertise in the WTO, which is demonstrated this morning on this panel, to take a positive leadership role, as Arantxa just said, in tandem with others to bring about necessary reforms. So what are the reforms that are necessary? Serious negotiations are needed, first, to yield new agreements liberalizing trade further and extending the rules of the system. We saw that with domestic regulation of services. Second, to restore dispute settlement seen as legitimate by all. And third, to develop the WTO as an institution with an executive secretariat to be more effective as an administrator of the trading system. A necessary early topic for expansion of the scope of the system's rules is crafting disciplines over industrial subsidies, as has been mentioned by prior speakers. It's unlikely that dispute settlement reform can be achieved without disciplines on industrial subsidies. Failure to address this subject will result in continuing trade conflicts. China will be both the recipient of complaints and a complainant with respect to the conduct of others. Areas of potential conflict should be reduced by providing clear international disciplines on both industrial and agricultural subsidies. 1 month ago, as we mentioned, speaking at the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, President Xi Jinping said that China is open to negotiations on industrial subsidies and state-owned enterprises in order to be accepted into the comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The issues involved should be resolved also on a multilateral basis, not just on a regional basis. China has been in the forefront of joint statement initiatives, as has been mentioned, in plurilateral negotiations, facilitation of investment for development, domestic regulation of services, the e-commerce discussions. China now should join with other participants in those joint initiatives to assure that the outcomes of the negotiations are included as a formal matter as part of the WTO's fully acknowledged agreements. They have to be regularized. They have to be brought into the WTO and accepted. China was and is essential to deal with COVID-19 and future pandemics. The WTO's members have yet to act collectively to set rules to which this and future pandemics can be dealt with more effectively in the trading system. It's imperative that that take place. China can also make an important contribution by joining the pharmaceutical agreement for duty-free trade in pharmaceuticals, as it's a major player in that area, and by updating the product coverage of the information technology agreement, including goods that are pandemic related, IT products. Trade will play an essential role in dealing with climate change, bringing foodstuffs from areas of plenty to areas of need, and bringing environmental goods from distant factories to places where they must be deployed. China has suggested, officials of China have suggested that the environmental goods agreement be brought back, the negotiations be brought back. That should take place. Chinese officials will have to deal, as we all will, with carbon border adjustment mechanisms. This should be an area that's subject to multilateral rules rather than imposed unilaterally or solved bilaterally if that were possible. It's really a challenge that's upcoming for the trading system, and there will be conflict if there's not a mutual agreement at a multilateral level. China is an essential party to each of the subjects I've just mentioned, and beyond those challenges of global health and climate, of course, there are geopolitical strains in international relations that can threaten trade, have been threatening trade. Trade becomes weaponized. Active management is required. The multilateral trading system was founded in the middle of the last century to underwrite and sustain peace. Pascal Lamy spoke to this issue, by the way, on a webinar on Friday. It was really very eloquent on the subject. The WTO can and should play a positive role in achieving this objective of maintaining peace in the face of current challenges. It should not be an issue that's shirked. China should move to a more active role in making the WTO succeed. That's been said, that it should take a leading role. I agree with that. It should join with the United States, the European Union, Japan, others, a few like-minded countries to preserve and improve the WTO by leading the reform effort. Under the GATT and the WTO, the economies of the world have become increasingly interdependent. This should be a cause for celebration and not fear. Strenuous efforts will be needed to keep global economic integration as a positive development, bringing about shared economic growth and sustaining peaceful relations. The world, of course, is very different than it was 20 years ago. The WTO is now in crisis. It's not in China's interest or in the interest of other members that it fail. The key anniversary for China in the WTO, I think, is not this one. It's the China at 25, the 25th anniversary mark. I don't know whether that's probably not porcelain, and Arantxa may know what it is, but I don't. Looking back from the 25th anniversary, the question will be, what has China done to sustain the multilateral trading system during these next 5 years? At events marking China at the WTO at 25, those speaking on panels like this one, I assume CCG will have such a panel, will be able to evaluate what President Xi Jinping meant when he said at the Shanghai Expo, "We support the WTO reform in moving in the right direction. We will not change our resolve," I'm quoting from Xi Jinping, "will not change our resolve to open wider at a high standard. We will not change our determination to share development opportunities with the rest of the world, and we will not change our commitment to an economic globalization that's more open, inclusive, balanced, and beneficial for all." I look forward to that panel discussion. Thank you very much.